Welcome, George Community Church and YouTube friends. Today we're going to be in Deuteronomy. Oh, that's hot. Deuteronomy chapter 4, but let's pray first. Lord, thank you that in the midst of a nationwide crisis and chaos, that you are still at work. Thank you for the news that dozens have been saved and even baptized at the site where George Floyd was killed. We're so grateful for that. Lord, I pray that you'd open our minds and our hearts to your word, that we could understand it and we could put into practice what we learn. We love you. Amen. Well, I call this a better nation, and this is a quote. It was attributed falsely to a Scottish guy who said that he got it from a Canadian guy, and in the midst of all of that, I couldn't tell when it was written. But work as if you live in the early days of a better nation. I really like that idea. That, and I don't know if the founding fathers, how much they were really aware of that. It seems like they were, our founding fathers. And this sermon, by the way, comes on Flag Day, which was not intentional scheduling on my part. But those early days, well, we're in early days of a better nation now. We're in the midst of a coronavirus crisis. We're in the midst of riots because of the killing of George Floyd. And we have the opportunity to work toward a better nation. And that's where I'm headed with this. And it's actually tied into this passage. It's talking about ancient Israel. It's not talking about America. And it's talking about a theocracy where God is in charge, not a democracy where people are in charge. But there are a lot of principles that we're going to see apply from our passage in our lives today. So we're going to read together. You're welcome to join with me on this. And first of all, we're talking about what a great nation is. For what nation is great enough to have a God as near to them as the Lord our God is to us whenever we call on him? And what nation is great enough to have righteous statutes and ordinances like this entire law I set before you today? Really striking to me, talking about a great nation, this great nation of Israel that was going to be started. And the two things about it in this verse are, or these verses are, that God is near to them and they have righteous statutes. So righteous laws is another way to say that. So in verse 5 and 6, it says, "See, I have taught you statutes and judgments just as the Lord my God commanded me, so that you do these things in the land where you are entering to possess it. So keep and do them, for that is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples, who will hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people." Then in verse 8, "Or what great nation is there that has the statutes and judgments as righteous as this whole law which I am setting before you today?" The laws are righteous. All your words are true. All your righteous laws are eternal. Joshua 1:8, "This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to everything that is written in it. And then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success." God's laws are righteous. Application to our country, our laws need to be righteous also. And Yahweh is near. The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. Psalm 145:18. And that's true of a whole nation. A whole nation, God was near to them. And usually when I think about God being great, I think about God's greatness expressed in his power, lightning, storms, earthquakes. God is distant, God is majestic, God is powerful in those ways. And instead, it's God is near. That's the measure of our greatness, is that God is near to us. He's not distant. He's not an absent father who set things into motion and then went away. But he's near to us. And he's nowhere nearer to us than in the person of Jesus Christ. talked about in Matthew 1:23 that one of the names Jesus would have would be Emmanuel, which means God with us. The person of Jesus Christ demonstrates to us who God is and shows us how near to us he wants to be. Also, generations are taught in chapter 4 of Deuteronomy, verse 9. Only give heed to yourself and keep your soul diligently, so that you do not forget the things which your eyes have seen, and they do not depart from your heart all the days of your life, but make them known to your sons and to your grandsons. In 2 Timothy 1:5 tells a story of Timothy and his salvation, and Paul writes about that. And he talks about his mother and his grandmother, and I forget which order, but one's Lois and one's Eunice, and how from childhood you have known the sacred scriptures that are able to give you wisdom for salvation. His mom passed that on to him. His grandma passed that on to him so that he could be saved. And that's what that talks about. Generations are taught. Our passage here is saying that we need to invest in the future generations and make sure that they understand about Jesus Christ, make sure that they understand about God's Word and about how God can be near to all of us. Those are some things this passage says is how you can have a great nation. What's on your list? Everybody's got their bucket list. I guess not a bucket list. A preference for what they want society to look like. And some people are really passionate about what needs to be there. But think about what it was for ancient Israel. These are the top three things. Righteous laws, God is near to them, and we're going to pass this down from generation to generation. Pretty awesome. Next, the passage tells us we need to keep away from idols. From Deuteronomy 4:15 and 16, and also 1 John 5:21. So since you saw no form of any kind on the day the Lord spoke to you out of the fire at Horeb, be careful that you do not act corruptly and make an idol for yourselves of any form or shape, whether in the likeness of a male or female. Little children, keep yourselves from idols. So keep away from idols. That's what also makes for a better nation. First of all, that passage said, you did not see any form. You didn't see a body. You didn't see a shape. When you were at the mountain, God, though he spoke to you and you heard his voice, you understood his words, you didn't see a mouth moving or a tongue moving or any of that. You didn't see a body of any kind. So don't make the mistake of thinking that God is an idol, God is a shape, God is an animal, God is a man, God is a woman. Why is your God invisible? I was thinking of just not putting a picture here at all. You know, your God is invisible. And then I found this one and I thought, well, that one's pretty cool too. But Colossians 1:15 says that Jesus Christ is the image of the invisible God. 1 Timothy 1:17, to the God, the immortal, invisible, the only wise God, be honor and glory forever and ever. Amen. God is invisible. He is spirit. And so we need to not make the mistake of thinking that we can make an image of a shape that looks like God. It's not possible because he has no shape. And only in Jesus Christ does God take on physical form so that God could become one of us, so that we could rub shoulders. And 1 John talks about what our eyes see and what our hands handle concerning the word of life. There's also some blame shifting, and it's pretty shocking to me, but this is the third time in 4 chapters that Moses does this. So look at verse 21. Now the Lord was angry with me on your account, and swore that I would not cross the Jordan, that I would not enter the good land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. For I will die in this land, I shall not cross the Jordan, but you shall cross and take possession of this good land. He also does that in chapter 1, verse 37, in chapter 3, verse 26. So he says, the Lord is angry at me because of you. He's putting the blame for his own sin, which other passages make it really clear. He did not treat the Lord as holy. We talked about that last week. He's the one who disobeyed the Lord, and the Lord's judgment was that he would not cross into the promised land. And instead, for the third time in 4 chapters, he blames the Israelites for his own sin. That's blame shifting. So there's something going on in our culture right now where this is taking place a lot. So we have the event of a police officer killing a man in custody. George Floyd was killed by Derek Chauvin. And so what happens in our conversation about that, though, is people are saying, well, George was on drugs. George had a criminal history. George did that. George did this. And those things may all be true. We're not fully sure, and certainly all of this is going to come up at the trial. But the legal strategy for the officer is to say George Floyd did wrong and put himself in that position. So that's blame shifting. Yes, he did things that were wrong, but that does not mean that the officer was in the right to kill him. And then something else goes on. As rioting has started, I've noticed that mostly the people that I'm hanging out with are talking about the rioting instead of the murder that happened. And so the rioting becomes a distraction, and it becomes another opportunity for blame shifting. It's their fault. You know, they're wrecking our economy, they're burning down these businesses, and not really thinking about as much, because it's a distraction, not thinking as much about what happened when George Floyd died. What problems did that point out to us in our society? And it's really easy to point fingers at other people instead of taking a hard look at that incident and seeing what does it mean for us. If we want to build a better nation, we need to keep away from idols, including the idolatry of I'm innocent and you're guilty. Having that be such a priority for people that they're going to put that above truth and above God. Something interesting also to me is that idols not only are disobedience, but they're also punishment in a way. Verse 25 and 28. When you become the father of children and children's children and have remained long in the land and act corruptly and make an idol in the form of anything, and do which is evil in the sight of the Lord your God, so as to provoke his anger. So when you do this, then the Lord's going to send you to other peoples, and you will serve gods, the work of man's hands, wood and stone, which neither see nor hear nor eat nor smell. So it's not only a sin to commit idolatry, but it's also something, in a sense, it's a punishment. God's going to send them out of their own country. They're going to experience serving gods of wood and stone that can't help. Book of Romans talks about that also. People refuse to give thanks to God, and God gives them over to worship the created rather than the creator. You know, this is apparently big fun for the crowd, but think about the humiliation that can be there for somebody sticking their face in basically a pig trough. And I know I've used the picture before of a human being at a pig trough, but I couldn't find it on the internet anymore because I guess it's dehumanizing. So it's filtered out somehow. But when you get to the point where, in the story of the prodigal son, you are longing to fill your stomach with pig food, and you're eating pig food, and suddenly you realize, even my father's servants are better off than this. That moment, you realize that your rebellion, your cry for independence from God, your fleeing from God into idolatry, or whatever it is itself punishment as well as rebellion. Is your God jealous? In verse 24 of our passage, it says this: For the Lord your God is a consuming fire, a jealous God. And when we turn to idolatry away from the real God, he gets jealous. We belong to him when we are his people. We belong to him. He will not share his glory with another, nor his praise with graven images, the book of Isaiah says. Hebrews 12:29 quotes this same idea, the same passage, that verse, saying, "For our God is a consuming fire." We dare not treat God flippantly. We dare not risk his wrath. We dare not provoke his jealousy. Yahweh alone is God. Here's chapter 4, verse 35. You were shown these things so that you would know that the Lord is God. There is no other besides him. Yahweh alone. Yahweh is the actual name of God. He disclosed to Moses in the book of Exodus. He alone is God. There is no other. These other gods, idols, so-called gods, are really demons, are really distractions from God. They're not real. They don't have power. They're not gods. The Lord alone is God. And he took one nation out of another nation. Or has a God tried to go and take for himself a nation from within another nation by trials, by signs, by wonders, by war, and by a mighty hand, and by an outstretched arm, and by great terrors, as the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? This is an evidence of God's power, taking the people of Israel out of Egypt and ultimately into the promised land, showing that Yahweh alone is God. And he also showed his power at the mountain, Mount Sinai, verse 36. Out of the heavens he let you hear his voice to discipline you, and on earth he let you see his great fire, and you heard his words from the midst of the fire. Back in verse 11 and 12. You came near and stood at the foot of the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire to the very heart of the heavens, darkness, cloud, and thick gloom. Then the Lord spoke to you from the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but you saw no form, only a voice. He showed his power, and Moses brings the people's attention back to evidences of God's power repeatedly. In the New Testament, there's a different evidence of God's power. It says in Romans 1:4 that Jesus Christ was declared the Son of God with power, declared with power by his resurrection of the dead. Ephesians 1:19 and following also, talking about the power that we have is the power of the resurrection. The same power that raised Jesus from the dead is what is at work in us, accomplishing God's work in us. Old Testament, God's power demonstrated by bringing the people out of Egypt and on into the promised land and appearing at Mount Sinai. God's power in the New Testament mainly demonstrated through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. He also drove out greater nations. Not only took them out of a greater nation, but into this area that had all of these other countries, all of these other nations in it already. So here's just one set of campaigns, the northern kingdoms that Joshua took over on the other side of the Jordan River. He drove out greater nations than you, greater and mightier than you, to bring you in and to give you their land for an inheritance, as it is today. Yahweh alone is God, and he shows that in our nation's history. Moses would say, and we would say also. Is your God too weak? With all of this power, with even the resurrection of Jesus Christ, that same power being at work in us, is our God too weak? Do we think, God can't handle this. I'm going to have to figure out a different way to accomplish this task because this is too big for God? None of us would probably say that out loud, but sometimes we think that way. We're not availing ourselves of the power of God to do the things that he's commanding us to do. Let's read chapter 4, verse 41 and 42. Then Moses set aside 3 cities across the Jordan to the east, to which a manslayer could flee after killing his neighbor unintentionally without prior malice. To save his own life, he could flee to one of these cities. So they were called cities of refuge. We're going to take a moment and talk about that. I think the idea of sanctuary city is connected with that. And the terminology is different, and so I didn't look it up to find out how much that's true. But the idea of sanctuary city, like here's Malibu, California, one of the richest areas in the world where movie stars live and all of that. I'm not sure how many people are going there for sanctuary, but it's an official sanctuary city. So that's about illegal immigration. And we've taken this idea, biblical idea, of a sanctuary city, but the city was not about illegal immigrants coming in and being able to stay for free. The city was about specifically manslaughter. When a manslayer, somebody who killed his neighbor unintentionally, and look at these 3 things, or the next 3 points, unintentionally, without prior malice, to save his own life, the manslayer could go there. And I'm going to tie this back into the situation that our country is in right now. And around the world, people are demonstrating over this killing of George Floyd. So that's not what this passage is talking about, but to me it's an immediate application. If we had been living in the days of ancient Israel, things could have gone much differently than they are going now with our legal system. So first of all, he would be safe from the avenger. Here's the manslayer running to the city of refuge. There's the avenger of blood, trying to take vengeance. So I was looking a lot online when it first happened, and then some again a couple of days ago. George Floyd's brother is named Philanese, and I thought, what an odd name that is. I haven't heard that name before. And so I looked it up, and it means lover, philo, lover of the small. How interesting, because that whole family, George Floyd is a really big guy, and his brother is a really big guy, and his name is lover of the small. I like that. Floyd means gray hair. I don't know if that's significant or not. But being safe from the avenger. So in this case, if this is the police officer who killed George Floyd, then that would be Philanese running after him to try to take vengeance. But it has to be unintentional. So in our passage here, let me read it for you. It's what we already read. Manslayer might flee there who unintentionally slew his neighbor without having enmity toward him in time past. So in this case, this is where our manslayer would have to flee if what he did was unintentional. So in this topic with George Floyd and Derek Chauvin, Derek means people ruler. I thought that was pretty interesting, significant in some of the comments about his personality, the trouble that he's gotten into. And then Chauvin means a small bald man. I thought, how weird is that? That this much smaller bald man is the one who killed this much larger man. But it has to be unintentional, and that's what the issue is. One of the issues that people have to try to decide. In our case, it's going to be by our legal system. Back then, in that day, also, it was by their legal system. The elders and the whole community really would hear evidence, and they'd have to try to decide, was this an intentional action or was this an accidental action? And without prior malice. George means farmer. Here we are at George Community Church in Estacada, and there's a lot of farms around, and George means farmer. And there used to be a lot of people in the community named George, which was also fun to me, meeting people named George who lived in George. As I was watching one of the videos this past week, they had the most audio, the most conversation was captured between George Floyd on the ground and Derek Chauvin on his neck. And George Chauvin called George Ned. Why didn't you get in the car, Ned? And I thought, why is he calling this guy Ned? Now, they knew each other beforehand. They worked in the same nightclub. Pretty hard to imagine there wasn't any prior malice. One of the witnesses said that they didn't get along. They bumped heads some. They knew each other. Ned. So I was asking my kids, what does Ned mean? And so they looked it up on the, what's that dictionary?
Urban Dictionary.
Urban Dictionary. And it stands for non-educated delinquent. So when Derek had his knee on Floyd's neck and he called him a non-educated delinquent, really it should be uneducated, but that doesn't make a nice acronym. But non-educated delinquent, that tells me that there's some malice there. There's some dehumanizing going on there. It's not just an accident, but rather something that he was doing intentionally. There's a plan. Now, I'm not on the jury. I'm not the judge. I'm not the executioner. None of those things. In a city of refuge situation, it would be somebody who unintentionally killed somebody, like in the bicycle accident picture I just had. Without any prior malice, you're just driving down the road and something happened. That person gets to be safe. But somebody who is intentional, somebody who had prior malice, or in the event was planning something and considering what he was doing, that person does not get to go to the city of refuge. That person does not get to be free from the manslayer. And that person, the Bible, in that economy, said that the manslayer, the avenger, could take vengeance upon the manslayer. And that would cleanse the blood from the land. In our case, we go through the legal system. There would be lots of years in prison if the officer is found guilty. How do we show justice and mercy? And both of those things are important. And too often we want mercy for ourselves and justice for other people, But really, all of us need that all the time. We need to experience justice. We need to provide a just environment for people to live and thrive in. We also need to have mercy on people who fall outside the bounds of justice. And we want that for ourselves also. We want to be treated fairly. We want to be shown mercy when we fall short. God's plans for a great nation include right laws, God's presence, no idols, and merciful justice. For an application, care about justice. It's so easy to let these riots going on distract us. And as I said, the people that I've been interacting with at my workplace, they're talking about the riots. And we're missing a great opportunity right now to talk about justice and to talk about race and to talk about people being made in the image of God and people needing to be treated with compassion no matter what they look like. For our discussion in a moment, what's one thing you see from this passage? Jumps out at you. And what's one thing that you will do? I'm going to give the benediction now, and then we're going to move on to our closing song. Romans chapter 12, verse 16 to 18. It says, "Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not be haughty in mind, but associate with the lowly. Do not be wise in your own estimation. Never pay back evil for evil to anyone. Respect what is right in the sight of all men. If possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men." God bless you.